or we're talking, as I say, our daily lives. Tonight we're going to talk about assistive technology. What does technology mean for us in our daily lives, and how can it assist us to live our lives better and our lives to the fullest, particularly if we have an impairment or disability of sorts? And we're going to focus on these questions. And with me tonight I have a fantastic panel, as always. And at my far right, no sort of political distinctions here, but to the right of the table, I have a colleague of mine from the University of Johannesburg, Professor Maximus Sifoto, and he's an associate professor in the Department of Educational Psychology. And he works on, particularly on ideas around visual impairment, and is actually setting up visual impairment studies for us here, or an envisioned center for visual impairment studies, and even a degree in visual impairment studies that we hope to roll out already next year at the University of Johannesburg. And he's also worked in career guidance. He's very passionate about career guidance. So, Maximus, warm welcome to you. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much. And
right next to Professor Maximus Sifoto, we have Chelsea Williamson, who is an inclusion and accessibility, sorry, I'm stumbling on my words tonight, at iSchool Africa. And we're going to hear a little bit more about what they do from Chelsea herself. But Chelsea has worked in drama therapy, and she has actually written a dissertation on drama therapy for deaf learners. So she's very, very apt to talk to studies around deaf studies, but then also hearing impairments. So we very warm welcome to you as well, Chelsea. It's lovely to have you with us.
It's lovely to be here.
And on my immediate right, we have Justus Doho, who is a researcher who is currently busy with his doctoral program here at UJ and at the Institute for Intelligence Systems that was quite recently launched, actually. And he works particularly on visual impairments, and he has written on these issues as well. And his research interests are not only in visual impairment, but he also works on ideas around machine learning and intelligence systems and computing networks and cloud computing. So he's very apt to talk to the technology and the systems behind the technology. It's lovely to have you with us as well.
Pleased to be here, pleased to be here.
Lovely, thank you. And on my immediate left, we actually have our sign-in language interpreter for this evening, Nicoline Detoit. So welcome, Nicoline. It's lovely to have you here. And it's great to have, it's actually the first time we have a sign language interpreter with us. So that's fantastic. All right, we have lots to discuss tonight. And as I said at the beginning of the discussion, we have, our focus tonight is on assistive technology. And I want to talk a little bit about our daily lives and how technology can assist us, and particularly then if we have an impairment. And I'm going to start with you, Maximus. Since you work on ideas around visual impairment, and you're busy setting up both a center but also a degree for visual impairment studies, technology in our daily life, whether we have an impairment or not, what does it mean?
Thank you very much, Prof. Technology today is inseparable to humanity, and it plays a critical role in allowing us the space to be able to deal with our daily activities in life. More so in the space of teaching and learning, especially in support of the learners who may have whatever type of disability. Technology is quite critical. If we take just an example, today it's very difficult for people to separate themselves from their cell phones, because that's how we connect, we interconnect with one another, not only in our immediate space, but around the world. So it is really crucial that we look at technology and befriend it with a caveat of saying, at the end of the day, we have to make it accessible to those who do not have it, because then it means they are excluded on the bigger world stage of technology.
Yeah. It's interesting because you say we need to befriend it, and of course that's there because we need to make it part of our daily lives. It needs to be seamless. If it's going to be, particularly I imagine when we talk about assistive technology, Jess, am I right? You know, that it needs, if it's not assistive, then, you know, if it doesn't assist us, it's not assistive, and that's it, you know. So can you talk a little bit to that? What does it mean?
What does it mean for assistive technology? So before I get started on that, there's a quote that I've heard and I feel like it sums up assistive technology, and the quote says, for people without disabilities, technology makes life easier, but for people with disabilities, technology makes life possible. And that is the whole premise of assistive technology. And and working in the field of disabilities, once I've seen someone with disabilities realizes what technology can do, how it empowers them, and the capabilities that it has, the doors that it opens for them, once they get that, then you can't get them to get rid of the technology. But what's amazing for people without disabilities, when you see the mental health studies that are coming out for learners without disabilities and with disabilities, they're actually introducing, I'm sure you know, things like Facebook depression is actually being recognized as a proper clinical thing that's getting treated. You have social media, and people are actually having withdrawal symptoms from not being able to use their devices. So yes, it's good that we're having it, but it's also important that we have limits on it and that we're aware of those limits. I mean, recent studies are saying that if a learner is on social media for longer than 3 hours a day, there's 70% higher chance of getting depression. Learners that are on it for higher than 5 hours a day have a 73% increased chance of suicide. So it's important that, yes, we're using these devices, but also that we are aware of the dangers of it as well. So we're using it for good, we're using it for the support, but then also as learners and as parents and teachers, that we're constantly monitoring it as well.
I mean, it's interesting that, you know, you talk about children and the usage, or maybe what could be labeled sort of overusage, and then it's not assistive. Then it has a negative, you know, side to it rather. And I hope we can come back to that. And I'm going to also come back to the online audience that I seem to have lost temporarily, actually. But I will pick up on discussions that's hopefully going on online as well. And I know you are very active online, so our audience. But Justus, technology in our daily lives, how can it assist us? What does it do?
In our daily lives, technology is kind of inseparable with our daily lives. We kind of rely on technology a lot, whether we are disabled or able people, because it really helps to make our life easy. It makes us do a lot to be productive and to also be inclusive in the society. So technology plays a vital role, especially for the disabled people, because it gives them confidence, and then it enables them to participate very productively in whatever they find themselves.
And I know, because you work then with the visually impaired, and that's something that, you know, is close to your heart as well, Maximus, and particularly the educational space. So maybe just to continue with what you're building on what you say. So particularly then, when we talk about a visual impairment, and of course when we talk about impairments, there are grades, and I'm going to pick up on something that I think that you've said as well, Professor Maximus. I know that, but we'll come back to that about, you know, the differently able people, and also, you know, to seeing the abilities in disabilities. But maybe just to stay with you for a bit. Visual impairments. What are the most revolutionary ideas that you can see in terms of visual impairments and technology that can be assisting people with visual impairments?
Currently, in terms of technology, there are a lot of plethora innovations and solutions that are geared towards visual impairment. Just as you said, there is degree of visual impairment, and then even blindness completely. So there are a lot of technologies now that are tailored towards specific impairment in terms of visual ability. So lots of them, I can't count now, but I think there are a lot of them that you find around. But the key thing is to try and study the disabled person or the visually impaired person, to know exactly the technology that suits his needs, so that you are not giving something that will not be helpful to him, because, as you said, what we are actually saying is for it to be assistive to the person. So if the technology is not assistive, then there is no need for it. So there is the key thing is to ensure that careful planning, careful study is done to know the exact specific technology that a particular person needs is critical.
And I mean, there are a lot of things, so that's maybe a distinction that one needs to do as well, make as well. So what is technology really? So I wear glasses and I wear contact lenses. Is that technology?
Yes, in a way it's technology.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
there are so I categorize the contact lenses maybe low-tech technology. There are other ones that are high-tech, a lot of artificial intelligence infused into it, a lot of high-tech equipment and all those things. So it depends, but contact lenses are assistive, can be term assistive
technology that we're very used to, you know, and we don't even think about in our daily lives. So Maximus, you know, to continue on these ideas, and particularly around visual impairment, then would you agree with Justus that, you know, this of course, there are a lot of things that we could mention, and there's a lot of different technologies. But what would you say, what do you see is the most revolutionary that you have seen so far in this field?
Okay, what I have seen so far is technology that is able to read a book for a visually impaired person, and to me, that was bringing the world that was, you know, outside the reach of a visually impaired person, right at the doorstep of that person, to say all these books that they could have heard us talking about, now they have access to them. And to me, education is captured through what Paulo Freire says, that you teach a person how to read the world. So that metaphor of reading is really very fundamental, and it says if this person now can go to whatever part of the world and read books there, then they have access to a lot of information.
And it's interesting because I'm going to turn to you now, Chelsea, as well. We're going to talk about younger people and assistive technology. Of course, we talk about different impairments, visual impairments, for example, or hearing impairment. We might talk about artificial limbs and technology that's assistive in as almost, you know, and it is about an extension of, when we talk about disabilities and impairments, it's about the extension of something that assists us as well, as much as it is then maybe even, you know, physical extension of our bodily functions or our physical functions. It's interesting, we're going to come back to age differences as well. So in aging, of course, also, you know, as we go older, we have different impairments as well, and where technology might assist us. But Chelsea, younger children, assistive technology, how does that change a young person's life? And what can it do?
It opens the world. And at iSchool Africa, we focus on the iPad, especially for learners. And even you spoke about books. The iPad can read books for learners who are blind, for learners that are dyslexic. The iPad can read word by word by word with learners. I mean, when I show you the things that the iPad can do, it's actually unbelievable. And what we've seen with learners with disabilities, once they've seen what they can do, the access to information that they have, the resources that they have, the ability to do things that they haven't been able to do, once they are able to do that on an iPad, it changes their world, it changes their thinking, it changes that I can't to actually I can. I said it, I was speaking about it earlier, but there was a girl at one of the schools in South Africa, Nani, and she's lost her arm, and her biggest dream was to play an instrument. But on the iPad, there's GarageBand. So she now can play a guitar and a piano and a violin, all by just touching her arm on the iPad. And it's amazing to see how once these learners see what they can do that they couldn't do before, it blows your mind. And to see the confidence that grows in them, to see the worlds open, it's phenomenal. And the nice thing is, it's not just for learners, it's for adults as well. It's for any person. I taught my grandfather how to use his iPad, and he loves it now. And he's blind in one eye, he's completely deaf, and he had a tracheotomy, so he can't speak. But because he uses his iPad, it's like he's fine. He doesn't need to worry about all of that.
Well, maybe come back to that, and the processes of aging as well. But I'm going to turn to you first, Maximus. You say, we need to see the ability in and the abilities in disability.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, maybe, and relate it back to also technology?
Okay, thank you very much. The word disability to me is a negation of ability. But everyone, in my belief, is born with some kind of abilities. But because of the social construction of what disability represents, we have been taught that everything is I can't, as she has said. When it comes to technology, therefore, that's where the augmentative part of technology comes to assist whatever little abilities there are to allow people to interact with the world. Yes.
It's interesting because I'm just picking up, I'm looking at what people are saying online, and actually people are talking about these ideas of the ages then, and how things changes. And Dominic Ford is saying, how do we manage the technology for a mature or aged who traditionally struggle to adapt to 4 hour, for example? And that's a little bit what you alluded to, Chelsea, about your grandfather, for example, and how then, and I imagine that this is also what you're in some ways are talking about, that actually we need to understand it from different perspectives. So it might be aging or young children who have particular needs. And I think that maybe it is the question of needs that we need to stay with. One has a need, whether it's as I said, a hearing impairment, and you worked on with deaf people, for example, or then a visual impairment. And Eustace, the idea of a need. How can we match needs up with technology, and how is technology being developed to match certain needs? Does it come from a needs perspective, or is the technology being developed? And I know you work with intelligent systems, so is it the technology sort of that's running ahead of us, or is it being developed from particular needs?
I can look at it both ways. Technology it's evolving quite fast, and new technologies are being developed. So what happens is, if there is a need, then you look at the technology at your disposal at that particular point in time, and then see how you can use those technologies to address the needs. For instance, the disability needs that we're talking about now, or visual impairment. So you look at the technologies that are available, which I said are growing at a very fast rate, and then you adapt them to the needs of the person who needs it.
there's a question. I'm going to post this question to all of you that's come up through our online. And Jonathan Houston, I'm so appreciative of Jonathan because he tunes into all our debates, and it says, Jonathan, welcome back. Need to say that. But Jonathan talks about, who drives this? And do you believe the technology developments in the hands of big tech companies? We talked a little bit about Apple, for example, or you mentioned, Facebook as well, and so forth. That do we leave it to the developers or the big tech companies to do this, or who should develop the technology? Who should be the drivers of assistive technologies? Any takers on such a question?
So for me, honestly, being a part of and seeing a part of what Apple is doing with their technology, they have an amazing accessibility team that works with, and if you look at their staff, they work with blind people, with deaf people, with people with motor issues, that they really do deep research into ensuring that their technology meets the assistive needs of people with disabilities, because they're going firsthand to people with disabilities and working with them. So they're not taking, for me, an able-bodied hearing person, this is what I think you need. They're actually working with people that have these disabilities. And you'll see that there are people that have complete cerebral palsy, no motor ability, using switch control, and they're one of Apple's top video editors, because that's how Apple functions, is they're very inclusive. So for me, but we're also seeing in the space of South Africa, today I was meeting with a lot of innovators that are creating technology in South Africa in themselves. But the problem with that, as a small startup tech company, they don't last very long because they don't have funding, they don't have the necessary support. So for me, it's a bit of a touch and go. But the one thing I would say is someone with a disability is the person who should be creating the assistive devices for disabilities.
Yeah, Maximus,
I do agree, and also say that in the space of education, where a lot of young people are, this is where we should actually encourage innovation.
Absolutely.
These are the people, along with differently abled people, who should drive the agenda for the development of this. And also it should go beyond that to the policy issues, because let's be honest, technology is very expensive, and not many people are able to buy what they need to live on a day-to-day basis. What about if there can be a way of addressing that particular need, to say, we know you have the capabilities to innovate. We are going to fund you to innovate, so that whatever you have come up with, the kind of idea of the open access that should actually go along with technology, to say people need these technologies, but they can't have them because of the cost. So I think, for me, the student of today who is teaching, who is learning to be a teacher, should at the same time ask themselves, how can I help my learners to learn better?
And we're going to come back to that, because we're going to talk about education as well, and the particular needs and assistive technology in an educational space. But I think that you touched upon something, and that's also what I'm picking up from our online audience, and that is, an overall question of, is assistive technology accessible to everyone? Is technology equal in this space? And I imagine urban-rural divides, but also then socioeconomic divides and rifts in this space that are very, very important to address. So how do we bring the technology? And I don't know if that's something that maybe, I can see it in your space, Chelsea, that, here we have a big company that's actually driving this, but are there other sort of, sources that this could be driven from to level the playing field and make assistive technology equal to everyone and accessible to everyone? I don't know, Justus, if you have any comments on that.
Currently now, the technology is not evenly accessible to those that needs it because of issues around the cost. So but there should be a way where we can look at it holistically and see how this technology can be accessible to those that needs it across the spectrum. Yeah. Even in the developed countries where you have this high-tech assistive technology being developed, the percentage of people that can access them is quite low, because all these things are based on high-tech equipment and so on and so forth. So the cost is there, and then those that are developing it, just like the Apple, they are also in business. They need to make gains, so they can't just give those technology out. But I think the universities too have a key role to play here, and the university system needs to be involved in the research of these technologies, especially localizing it to specific situations. Like for example, in South Africa, what are our specific needs? Because those technologies that are bought off shelf may not be adequate to our needs. So universities need to come in and engage the big techs and see how this assistive technology can be customized to specific needs, and I think that will go a long way in making it accessible to a large number of people.
No, and I mean it is being, they're being discussed, various models online as well, and I hope we can maybe come back to some of these ideas as well. But you mentioned universities, you mentioned education, and I'm going to start with you, Chelsea. So you work in schools, and particularly in special needs schools.
Yes.
And in terms of technology, so you mentioned earlier that it changes people's lives, and we have young kids who then might feel that they early on in their lives they cut off from playing that musical instrument or joining friends in the playground maybe. So I imagine that there are a lot of things that could be very assistive in this space. Have you seen examples of that? So we're talking schooling, we're talking younger children, and particular technologies that you would like to highlight as case studies, for example?
Oh, absolutely. So like I said, we focus in on the iPad. So we had Nani, the one girl. We have deaf learners, and we ran a program last year called Deaf Girls Can Code. And it was amazing to see how learning that 21st century skill ignited something in these deaf learners in Hum and Scroll. And it was amazing, because I don't know if you know, there are 4 times more job opportunities in the tech industry than there are anywhere else. So teaching these learners coding, this necessary 21st century skill, opened doors for them that weren't open, and that was accessible on the iPad. And that was amazing. Now these girls are so interested in going into the field of tech and exploring this idea. So that was that. We've had blind learners as well, using the iPad for various things for daily life. I was speaking to a blind person the other day who uses technology to write soundtrack to movies using voiceover. I mean, that's his job. How amazing is that? You'd think that because he's blind, he can't see the movie, but he uses audio descriptions to hear what's happening in the movie and make soundtracks for movies. How amazing is that? So there's so many cases that we're seeing across all different disabilities, and it's just, I get so emotional about it. Half the time I think I just spend sobbing, like excited about the technology.
And what you can do. And I mean, in an educational space, and I recognize that often our classrooms, and we're going to talk, we're at the University of Johannesburg is a university, and we all work in that space. But I have myself as a teacher and lecturer often picked up on things where I've asked students with various impairments that, how can I assist you? And often it is very, very small things, but of course technology then can be revolutionary. And is there something, Maximus, that you have seen as being very revolutionary in the education space in terms of technology, assistive technology?
There's quite a lot, and if I may, in effect, talk about areas instead of just one thing. For example, written language assistive devices, and that goes a long way because a lot of us even use that. For example, spell check alone, it goes a long way. We also have speech recognition and speech synthesis. That is very important. Also reading technologies, as I alluded to earlier, something that can read for a person who is blind, giving them that information. But of utmost importance, I think, is mathematics assistive technologies that actually help learners to understand mathematical concepts. This is very, very important. Take an example of what you said about a person who is visually impaired and also equally hearing impaired. How do they access information about this is a cycle? But could technology assist them to actually reach that stage? And the answer is yes. And we go on again to look at other issues of helping memory organization in terms of what we are doing now. The universities, if you allow me the space, UJ is dealing with neurodevelopment. That is where we are working now as the Department of Educational Psychology. Before I was working with visually impaired, but now I've moved into this space. Hearing impairment is with vets. These are all things that in all areas we need to have information that what he said, look at the need that pertains to a particular learner, and then you develop according to that and help the person to reach their potential.
Absolutely, and that's actually the question that comes up, and Morpha Online says, question is how friendly is our universities, city and public environment? You know, and that's it, isn't it? You know, how adaptable are we? But also, you know, what is the current situation? Is our universities, or our universities, sorry, I should say, and even, you know, the surrounding areas of a university, our campuses, how adaptable are they, and how ready are they to actually incorporate these assistive technologies, for example?
I would like to add something on that, to say that I've referred to these three areas. This is a direct, focused approach by government, assisted by the EU, to say, how do we, together with communities, hold our hands to do exactly what you are talking about. And the encouragement was to go by way of developing centers of excellence. Excellence can never come only within the classroom. We have to hold hands with communities, and this is exactly what is happening now. An example that I can allude to is the Center of Neurodevelopment that is going to be based at the Soweto campus. That is a strategic decision that has been taken by the university to say, even as and when people see the need to walk into the university center, they should be able to do so. They should feel an old man or woman who is sitting at Soweto should say, actually, I have an indigenous knowledge that I want to share with those students. They should be able to approach us and say, guys, here I am, I want to share. I want to learn from you, as well as I can help you learn something from our own cultural systems. Because what is important is to understand the context from where a person with a disability emerges from. That is critical, because we are only not helping this person, but also the people who are supporting them to reach their goals.
And I think that's exactly what Mofokeng says, you know, and he's talking also about where's the funding going to come from, and I missed that question earlier, but he's talking about, you know, it's really about the universities, the environment, city and public environment. You know, it's an ecosystem that needs to come together to actually pick up on needs, and of course we can be incorporate assistive technology in people's daily lives, but is it then also transferable, adaptable in all the spheres that we move? You know, we move from universities into work life, we move in our communities, we live our daily lives, we go shopping, we have our home situations and so on. So all of this needs to work together, I imagine. And just as, how do you see that, and what does from your perspective and the doctoral studies that you are doing, for example, and then also, you know, the Institute for Intelligence System, do you work in this field?
Yeah, the Institute of Intelligence System, it's like what do I call it, like the hub for different areas of learning to come together to develop technologies that could be of benefit to humanity. So it goes beyond just assistive technology. It goes to different kinds of, but basically, since we are talking about assistive technology, this is an area where we can partner with different departments, like Department of Psychology,
yes.
The medical schools,
yes.
Even the disabled people. They need to give feedback as to the use of this technology, how it's helping them, how it can be improved.
Exactly.
You can also do it indirectly through putting in sensors that monitors the day-to-day life of this disabled people as they use this assistive technology. Then you can generate data indirectly from use of it, and then from there you can create knowledge and see, okay, from this data I can be able to improve on this assistive technology. So it's a community of people that have to come together from all spheres of life to create what the ideal thing that we envisage.
So that's really interesting, and haven't thought about that. I'm straying a little bit from the questions around education specifically, but maybe we'll come back to that. Let's stay with that. Actually, the idea then of harnessing big data. So we're used to that in other spheres of our lives. So how data is harnessed, where we do our shopping, how we do our shopping, and online audits and so on. And you can even do that live in live situations in various ways. But it's interesting then that you say that actually now we have, for the first time, the technology also then to work with the big data that we can collect for single case studies, and we can compare them and actually pool those resources. And that must be something that could be life-changing for people with various impairments and disabilities. I see, Maximo, you're agreeing. Yeah. No, and I think that and I imagine that's something that is important also for the work that you do at the Institute for Intelligence Systems. So let's come back then to technology, and I think it's someone speaking up on language debates in school and so on, and how it can assist. But I think we'll stay with particularly impairments, and of course there are barriers as well, the language barriers, for example. We've talked a little bit in earlier episodes about what technology can assist in terms of learning new languages and facilitate and so on. And of course we have talking about sign language here as well. But in terms of then our universities, are there things that you are seeing, and both you, Justus, and you, Maximus, in our own context, as in a university context, is most important innovation or technology that you have seen that has been life-changing for our students, for example?
I think you're more in the the ones I see commonly is basically with the physically disabled individuals on motorized wheelchairs, climbing stairs and stuff like that. I think it's quite very assistive to those disabled students. I've not really had contact with the classroom environment to know exactly which technology are being used in the university settings, but this one particularly I find very important for physically disabled individuals.
Yes. Okay. So some of the devices that are out there, for example, help learners to write, and some of them help them to access information through hearing, and this is what is happening now. But allow me to get back to the space of neurodevelopment, where learning needs really become very, very critical for us. For example, within neurodevelopment, we have a whole gamut of disabilities that are there. An example that I can remember now is dysarthria. This is a person who is never able to articulate what they want to say. But if we want to look at the context of South Africa and ask ourselves, are there technologies out there in South Africa? We were talking with him earlier. in my understanding, not yet. And this is an opportunity for innovation. This is why I alluded to youngsters in our society to actually think of what they can do. The problem with information technology that we bring in is that it is not actually tailor-made to address our own needs here. And as far as the center of neurodevelopment that is going to be developed is concerned, you spoke of big data. This is where now we will get a lot of information in order to innovate to address this particular gap that is there in our society.
It's interesting. Chelsea, yes?
Do you mind? For learners that are pre or non-verbal, the iPad can help. So there are amazing, they're called ACC apps, augmented and alternative communication apps, like ProLoco to Go, choice boards, and we use it with our autistic learners. And honestly, we've seen how it's really improved their linguistic skills. There's another app called Book Creator. Book Creator is a visual book creator where we've created books using Macton, which is the language autistic learners use, where it can either be used as a Macton dictionary, or it can be used as to create stories for the learners that are non-verbal. So we're really seeing how the iPad can help in that field.
Yes. While I agree and accept that, I always think of a learner who is sitting at the corner of a country where there are no iPads, there are no resources. How do we address this? That's why I'm saying, to me, innovation that is homegrown will link to what you are saying, because it is critical. We learn from all these apps and all that, but how do we then transfer that knowledge to a learner who is sitting in a farm school somewhere, who can access the technology that we are talking about?
That is the divide that we alluded to earlier. So of course it's easy for resource schools, for example, to access technology, better research universities, but there's also then that rural, often rural-urban divide that we see with learning spaces as a whole as well. So you're, of course, doubly, triply disadvantaged maybe if you're in a school in a rural area or in an accessible area, and also, of course, in a context of a lower socioeconomic context. And there are a lot of questions, and I mean we have spoken about that before, because the questions that comes up online, what can we do? And we've asked this many times with the technological discussions that we've had, or when we've had discussions in these Cloudebate around technology, is what partnerships do we need to form? So Chelsea, you have schoolings that forms partnerships then with private partners. So, government, someone raised, I think it was Ivy Morilana online who raised it, was government not going to be involved? And who's going to get involved here? Who do we form clever partnerships with? And universities, as you alluded to earlier, have a role. But what would you say to that? Who's going to drive this?
I'm liking the partnership that Chelsea is actually spearheading, because it says we can reach this many people, but we need to then extend it further, so that we say to ourselves we're going to reach out to those many people there. Communities have community centers, they have community libraries. Why are we not taking this community there, where instead of our young people sitting in the sun, they can have something fun to go and do while they are learning at the same time? The resources are at the centers, at the metropoles, but they are not trickling out to people who really need them. My son and your son may have an iPad in their house, but that child in the community that does not have that. This is a very good initiative, and the communities is for us to say, Chelsea, how do you actually help us access this technology in a way that even an ordinary person can be able to buy it for themselves and use it in their own home?
And to level the playing field in those places as well. Do you want to say something?
So I totally agree with you, but the majority of the schools we do are rural and township schools, because we know that they can't afford it, and those are the schools we target. And we don't have as much funding. So we're an NPO that uses Apple technology. So we're not for profit or anything like that. We do this because we are passionate about it, and we rely heavily on funding. And that's probably maybe 90% of the work that we do is finding funding to do the projects that we do. And the schools that we do it at are generally impoverished schools, but we go there and we ensure that when we give them that technology, they don't need access to internet, so everything is offline, downloaded on their app, so they don't have to do anything, and we can access their devices remotely. So if things need to be updated or apps need to put in, we can do it from our head office here, and it doesn't matter if they're at a township school in the Eastern Cape. We can do it remotely for them, and we set them up. They don't pay for it. We are passionate about it, so we ensure that we try to find funding, and we're always looking for new funding. So if anybody knows any funders, you know, we're game for it. But yeah, so we do rely heavily on funding.
Of course, and I mean that is going to be, and then you know there's the low tech and the high tech, of course, and different costing for everything in between. And those are really important questions, and we have spoken about that, you know, as I said earlier on during our Cloudebate, exactly that, you know, where's the funding going to come from, and we need, of what has been said over and over again, and it is important to emphasize it's going to be partnerships between, you know, the private sector, government sector, but also, you know, a lot we need to come together, and of course, where is the research then being driven through universities and so on, and we are in many ways a microcosmos, you know, schooling system as a whole of the world, and there are a lot of things that can happen on campus, and there are a lot of things that we could do and should be doing as well. So I want to shift the gear a little bit, and time passes very, 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 very quickly. Of course, there's always the, you know, and in an educational space, and we're going to talk a little bit about the future before we wrap up as well, but I think this is something that Dominic is picking up on online as well. You know, there are technologies is of course about also breaking down barriers. Jonathan earlier talked about stigmas around disabilities, for example. And do we need to break down stigmas before we advance the technology? But also, what are the barriers that we can break down? It seems to me if we all can use an iPad, you know, the level field will be, you know, if we're doing the same thing on that iPad, we have already leveled the playing field to a certain degree. And I think that's what you alluded to as well. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, so stigma is actually a very big part of people with disability, especially in these settings, cultural issues and stuff like that. And if this what Chelsea is doing is not accessible to certain people, they will like try to hide the disability in their children because it's being stigmatized in the society. So those children will be deprived of assistance. But if there is awareness is also key. That look, disability is not the end of the world. I mean, people can be helped and then they can live productive life. So that awareness is key. Then the settings in schools need to be equipped with this equipment so that the parents can be able to take their children into those schools instead of keeping them at home idle and then without no help. So these are issues that needs to be addressed, and then government too has its own role to play with policies, with funding, because that's the key issue. And then where university comes in, it doesn't have to be high tech. The most important thing is that it should have high quality and affordable. Those are the key issues. It doesn't have to be high tech. Even if it's a simple thing, but it's effective, and I think that's key, and affordable. So I think we'll be able to cover a lot of coverage of people that needs this assistive technology.
It's interesting, and there are a lot of interesting. I mean, you're very active. The discussion online is and it's so interesting, and I think there are a lot of things that we ideally should pick up on. But since we are sort of, you know, nearing the end for tonight. The future. If we look to the future, what does the future hold in terms of new assistive technologies? That's something that you would like to pick up on, and I'm going to turn to you first. Justus, is there anything that you particularly think that, wow, this is a game changer?
Yeah, the future is unimaginable. So much going on in high-tech world, and so many solutions, so many innovation going on. So I see the future bright, and I was just reading recently there's a person who was paralyzed and was hospitalized for 2 years, couldn't move. So someone took the challenge, and an exoskeleton has been developed, and then it gets stimulus or sensors from his brain, and he can be able to control. For the first time in 2 years, he was able to move around. So many things going on, which will actually be a game changer for people with disability. I think the 4IR it's something that is also driving it, and I think it's important we in the African continent to be engaged in what's going on in the research world, especially universities who are taking the lead. So.
I think it's interesting. We can come back to that as well. It's interesting of technology coming out of the continent as well. But Chelsea, if you look to the future,
for me, it starts with every individual, and I love what we're all saying. It's about holding hands. It doesn't matter whether you have a disability or you don't have a disability. It's about creating awareness within yourself, within your immediate community, asking questions and not being ashamed. If you see somebody with a disability, rather than getting awkward and turning around and walking away, ask them those questions that you want to ask them, because I'm telling you, working in that field, the worst thing that you can do is go, oh, I don't know what to do. Okay, rather communicate with them, talk to them like a normal person, and you'd be surprised at what happens. And if this interests you, go into the field, do research on it, find ways that you can make an impact. Because we can sit here and talk about it as much as we want, but we're 3 people. And at the end of the day, if everyone listening to this takes a stand and does something about it and asks questions and talks about it, the more people talking about it, the more change is going to happen.
And I imagine as well, I mean, something that I was thinking about earlier as well, that in many ways, when we talk about technology and assistive technology, I mean, it's about improving people's lives, and it's about, us all, wanting to live the best lives that we can, and that's a right that we have, and that should be a human right. And I'm thinking about stigmas, that probably as well, there are a lot of actually damage in some ways around stigmas done as well by technologies being, all about the bionic man, or the, the Hollywood take on tech. But we'll base that discussion. Maximus, if you look to the future, what do you see?
For me, the future in the world of artificial intelligence is a future that is bittersweet, in a sense that there are fears of the unknown, and it is incumbent upon those who know then to share the knowledge, and again to cater for the well-being of people in the humanity, let me say, in all their spheres of life. I'm saying this because yet it is going to give us hope to say we are looking at the brighter future. But what happens with the people that it lives outside the means of livelihood at the end of the day? If we look at the specific group of people with disabilities we are talking about, it will help those who have means to access it. But what about the rest? And yet, the idea is to be inclusive, to bring everyone on board, so that we can say we are actually achieving our Millennium Goals, our Sustainable Development Goals, and at the end of the day, it gives us that hope that yes, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
And my own wish is that in an educational space, that of course, where many university lecturers, we don't get the same training as primary school teachers, for example. And I imagine that they have a little bit more, a better understanding and hopefully better training on certain special needs within their classroom. But since we all have to engage, whether we're primary school teachers or secondary school teachers or university lecturers, we have to engage with technology. And they have to take the technology that actually, is learning technology. And I think that the leap then to assistive technology shouldn't be that great. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping once again that will be something that breaks down barriers for us, that as we go forth then there isn't, this kind of huge divides between assistive technology and the technology that we all use and at very great of impairments, for example. Yes. And I think that's something that's hugely important. Mm. So any last comments? What do you think that in terms of assistive technology and the discussion that we've had tonight, is there something that we need to take forward, for example, for we talked a little bit about what the future holds, but is there something particular that should, a take-home message maybe for our participants at home and our participants online?
Just to agree with what Prof. Maximus have said, issue with artificial intelligence, I think there is an issue of ethics. As technology grows, there has to be boundaries and rules to govern how this technology is implemented, especially for disabled people. We will talk about big data. If you have sensors that are generating data from a sensor which is implanted in a disabled person, who get access to those data, how is it used? These are issues too that needs to be looked at, and create a rule that this is who should get the data, how the data is going to be used, and so on and so forth. So ethical issues are issues that we need to look at in the future as technology grows for the assistive. And
I do think that ethics is something that we need to talk about more in this space anyway, and particularly around technology usage. So any last comments, Maximus and Chelsea?
No.
For me, really, is more of an appeal for political will to support endeavors like this, so that assistive technologies, infiltrate society. Yeah. They should not be only centered in the metropoles, but even out there, people should feel that the changes that are taking place, they are part of it, instead of being spectators who are watching from afar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Jessie?
Well, from my side, we run a lot of workshops on this. 3rd of December, I'm running a workshop at the iStore in Sandton called iStore Meets Disability Awareness. So follow us on social media, iSchool Africa and iTeacher, and hear about the workshops that we're running, and come and get more information from us so that we can empower you and equip you to deal with people with disabilities. Right. And once you empower yourself, you'll ultimately empower your community. I mean, you can start simply, if you're interested in learning sign language, you can download the eDeaf app. Absolutely free, and you can start learning South African Sign Language. So
it's interesting. There's actually been a lot of these things being said online. Different NPOs, for example, they're working in different areas, for example. So I hope that people have been picking up on these things when you've been in these discussions and actually following up. And there's been some links shared online as well, which I think is really interesting. So what I take away is the debates around ethics, as you say, debates around breaking down the boundaries, which I think is so, and breaking with stigmas, and this idea then of also high quality, low cost, and to make assistive technology equal and accessible to us. So assistive and accessible, hey? That's what we want. And I think those are the important episodes or things that we've talked about in this episode. So thank you very, very much. It's been fantastic having you here, and time goes so quickly as always. But you've been an amazing panel, and thank you to you at home, and thank you to Nicolette, who's actually been who's been doing the sign language interpretation for us tonight. I'm hugely appreciative of that, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. This is our last Cloudebate for this year, but we will be back. What is it? I shall be back. We will have new discussions in the new year, and I hope that you will all join us then, and that you will tune in again, and we will advertise this as we've done online as well through the UJ website and the UJ 4IR website, where you can follow previous debates as well. So thank you, have a lovely evening, and God bless. Very, very nice. Thank you so much.